Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Or if this is your first time ever listening to our show, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you to everybody who's been coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. So my name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
Hey, Thom, I'm great. It's really good to hear your voice. You know, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had the pleasure of dealing with the Trusted Traveler program this week, which means I'm getting my TSA pre-check and global, global entry card up to date. They both expired during the pandemic. And that's like, wow, if I'm going to travel, I got to fix that because I hate long lines, especially long lines with people still breathing on me, if you get the point.
Well, and you know, that's the whole thing is for better or worse, we're back to travel. We're back to in-person meetings. I'm actually spending the Thanksgiving holiday with my daughter and her future husband. My wife and I are going to go and stay in Chicago at their house for their new house for a couple of days. So it's starting, compared to last year, we're starting to get that feeling. And I am, between now and Christmas, I am either speaking or the master of ceremonies for 3 large conferences. And so that's actually something I haven't seen but 1 or 2 spread out. To have 3 within like a 6-week period, we're getting back to human connection.
Well, so when you and I talked, maybe a month ago, maybe it was 6 weeks ago, you were really, at the end of August, you were really upbeat. Things were picking up. And then like September was like a cold rag thrown on everything. It's like, what the heck happened? And it happened with everything I'm involved with in terms of conferences. Everyone that I participate in is virtual through February at the moment. But I got told the other day to get ready to travel in January. So,
late October, I started to see companies and associations really starting to say we need to bring our people together. So, I think we're going to see that across industry lines. So,
do you think that's just the vaccination status, or what are the motivations in a couple sentences?
So, I think part of it is that there's a sense of security because a lot of people are vaccinated. And I think the other thing is that, humans can't operate, socially distanced forever. I mean, the serendipity of people coming together and sharing ideas, whether it's inside a company, whether it's a customer conference, or whether it's an association, industry trade association, people, when they come together, that serendipity is how ideas happen. It's how deals get made. And I think people are hungry for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did sneak out to one in August here in Michigan. It's this automotive research one that's held annually. And of course, it skipped a year because of the pandemic. Anyways, to your point, we weren't there in a break more than 30 minutes. And we ran into some other people retired from GM. And we started comparing notes about, what are we each doing and so on. But, one guy was helping a university. I'm working with a couple of small companies besides doing podcasts with you. And it was just interesting. And so just the mere fact that we were catching up, there was a guy I'd worked with 20 some, maybe even 25 years earlier. And he walked up to me. And of course, we're both gray haired now. And he's like, "Do you remember me?" And I'm like, "Oh, no." I did not remember him. And then he said a couple things. I said, "You're kidding me." And then I'm like, "Oh." And I always figured this gentleman's name's David. I figured David was older than I was. It turns out he's a few years younger. He says, "Well, I can't retire yet, but I will shortly." And so anyway, we compared notes about our journey the last 20 years. And you're right. That human connection, there's no way that would have occurred on Zoom or even on email. We probably would have just passed it on, too much to do and other things. So it was a gas. I was glad he stepped up to me. I was glad I spent the day and a half. It was the next week the people here in Michigan started, taking a step back just because of the way things were unfolding.
My belief is that we're going to see a few more step backs before we're out of this whole thing again. My daughter's wedding was postponed twice during the 2020, and she has decided to schedule her wedding for June of 2023 because she thinks over the next year there's still going to be some starts and stops. And I think she's right. She's done a lot of research on sort of what's going on, and she wants to be beyond it. Hopefully by 2023 we can be fully beyond it. But I do believe that there is this hunger for people to really want to get together. And that's one of the reasons I get hired is, I help set the tone for the organization to make sure that people are going to network and connect. And I'm doing a lot of tech events, and the tech companies are hungry to get people together.
Yeah, well, so it'll happen. And I think through 22, at least, we'll start to compare notes. And I agree, the hunger's there. I think people are just now maybe a little concerned about the safety side. And, you got to remember, and part of what we're going to talk about today about digitization, we're so connected through digital means that we can pick up on any storyline. And then we can go find the pod of people that view that to add emphasis. And so, our ability to judge is also impaired by our inability to connect with maybe broader views or more scientific views. And I think that's one of the interesting challenges of all this virtual world is how do we bring even some sanity to the discussion, right? I mean, it's one thing that, we got politicians saying, well, just follow the science. Okay, well, let's talk a bit about that, right? What does that really mean? And the trouble is, it's overwhelming, especially if you're hungering to talk to people. Even if I disagree with you, I'd still like to be in the same room with you, right? We could talk about how Texas and Michigan can't win key football games or something like that.
Neither one of them. At least some years we can argue that, Texas is up and Michigan isn't. But this year, neither one of them can win. All right.
All I got to say here in Michigan, one more point. Football's king around here. It is amazing that Michigan State is in the Final Four, at least the preliminary for the playoffs for the college football. Thank you, Michigan, for giving Michigan State this wonderfully tough game, back and forth. It was a great game to watch, regardless of which team you're in favor of. And I have the pleasure of living exactly halfway between the two stadiums. So I can go one way and get a neighbor that was really happy, and I can go the other way and get a neighbor who's really unhappy. and it's just the way it is in Michigan this time of year. And actually, all of the Midwest, as you guys know, we're big football fanatics up here. At least a lot of us are.
Well, I live in Texas, and we invented Friday Night Lights. So there you go.
Yeah, I know. And everybody except Austin knows how to play football. Never mind.
So today I thought it would be fun to talk about this whole world. We live in this digital world. People who work around PLM, it's all about digitalization. But, terms get thrown around a lot. And I thought today we would talk about what is digital and what is digitalization. And so, Craig, could you define these two terms? What's the difference?
Well, so digital is computers, right? It's ones and zeros. And so you could argue, at least in our lifetimes, Thom, I never had a secretary who typed up a manuscript or a document or a memo or whatever. Even in college, I was using something called Deck Runoff for doing postscripting and formatting a document. My senior thesis was done electronically, digitally, and my advisor was, "Wow, how'd you do that? I thought you were going to use the secretarial pool." And I'm like, it's just that's the time, right? So that was in the early 1980s, late 1970s. So digital just means no paper or no prototypes even, right? When we talk about mechanical engineering, a lot of people think, well, until you build one and break it, you don't know. Okay, well, the truth of the matter is you do know, because there's been simulation techniques starting back in the 40s and 50s and then developed through my lifetime. And now you can't get out of school without knowing how to use those tools. So digital is at least using computers to replace paper. Digitalization, I have to credit my colleagues at SimData. They picked it up from others too. None of us have really coined it uniquely. But when you change a business to take advantage of all these computers, then and maybe produce a new way of doing something. That's digitalization. You've really changed your business. You become more profitable. You create brand new businesses because of the use of computers. So it's not replacing the paper. It's replacing your current products, right, with some other different thing.
So can you give me an example of that?
Well, the one that we all do, and we do it subconsciously now, is think about recorded music. If you're old enough, you've got LPs in some closet somewhere, or else you're an aficionado and you like the old style analog pressed vinyl, right? If you go forward a few years, then all of a sudden there were 8 tracks and cassette tapes, as that was a recorded medium, magnetic recording on a piece of tape that had to go around in a circle. And then before too long, some group of, it was actually people in Germany, invented something called MP3. And before you knew it, your music was turned into ones and zeros and stored on some device. Now, originally it was a little disk drive inside of a little device. So we don't even remember iPods anymore, but the original iPods were actually a mechanical disk drive spinning. And so the ones and zeros are on there. Something read it off the disk drive and then played it as music. And, you and I are both wearing headphones for recording. It was processed. The recording was cleaner. It was prettier. It was almost too pretty, right? It was pristine. But in any case, it became digital. Well, that's digital. When did it become digitalization? Do you have any recordings that you physically hold in your hand anymore? Tape?
I do.
LPs?
I do not. I don't have any LPs
right.
left.
I can't even find mine. and you pay, or at least I did because I was lazy. You pay again for a service to say, I want to listen to Chicago. I want to listen to the group Chicago anytime, anywhere, whether I'm driving or working on some writing or just having a good time out on the mower, right? It's all through a cloud. That's digitalization, where the music is no longer physically in my possession like a licensed book. Even though your book, if you got an e-reader, your book's up in the cloud somewhere, or your right to view a book is in the cloud. And so digitalization is about changing the way a service works. So I don't buy a copy of a book anymore, though I might for my bookshelf. But in general, I don't. I buy the right to read a book. Right. And so the business changed fundamentally. That's digitalization. Now, everybody listening, think about your business and ask yourself the question, am I digital or am I digitalization? And I think what you'll find is the really successful companies in today's world, look at their stock valuations, things like that. They really have nailed digitalization. Whatever it is they've decided to do, the reason their valuations are so high is because they're embracing digitalization. So computers replacing paper, absolutely. And replacing processes and coming up with new value statements for customers that they're willing to spend money on. So there's more coming.
I was just
think today, all of us use some kind of navigation app, right?
Sure, absolutely. Can't live without the GPS anymore.
Well, it's more than GPS. GPS tells you where you're at, right? What it doesn't tell you is the traffic pattern. The traffic pattern comes from everybody else sharing where they're at and how fast they're moving. And then somebody like Google comes along, throws it in a map and says, oh, it's red over here and green over there. Well, what does that mean? It means it's above average speed or below average speed. And so the amalgamation of all that data points from different people into one new view of traffic flow all of a sudden becomes really helpful. And it's a really cool app. And you didn't pay for it, or at least anymore you don't pay for it, right? It just comes along with everything else. Okay, so digitalization, what's going on if it's free? Well, the guys that founded Google, they were quite clear as they founded Google what they were all up to. It wasn't about search. It was about data. And they wanted data, all kinds of data, what your reading patterns were, what your positions were, what your speed was on a highway. And they wanted to take advantage of that to tune their artificial intelligence. And so, I don't think it was underhanded. I think they were quite above board. So don't anybody get in a conspiracy theory here. But at the end of the day, data brought into a context is really part of the journey of digitalization. And digitalization is all about how do you take what you know, what you're really good at, and make money with it? Well, understanding customers, understanding what customers really want helps. Somebody's going to invent something, and somebody else is going to figure out how to make it better, and that's digitalization.
So are there other key elements to this journey from digital to then digitalization? Do you have some other examples?
Well, you don't want to do just put your data on computers or even put your data in a cloud, right? You really do want to understand your company's process. So in the car business, right, we bring value to a customer when they buy the next model. We come along and do some market research. By the way, market research is a fine example of digitalization because you're trying to study behavioral patterns. What drives consumers to buy the new car? Well, maybe it's the new color palette because somebody famous drove a particular color and everybody else wants to follow the famous people, right? I mean, it might be. As an engineer, I don't like being motivated by this, but in fact, it is the way some markets are motivated, right? So I think digitalization or the understanding of data and then bringing the data into a context to make decisions on, that's something that market research has done forever, but now it can do it in hours instead of months. Right. In the past, how would they do it? The way they would survey and they would collate and they would study different regions of the country. Well, they can do that all now, but they can do it in a few minutes. And that's what's really interesting about what's going on. And it's kind of a stretch now, but I want people to appreciate it's really going on where digitalization is studying what we all do when we're on networks of computers, right? So examples like maps are the ones that say, wow, that was really valuable. Even the original search, right, was really valuable because you could find stuff quickly. It's really frustrating the search engines now that put all the advertisements up because you got to wade through them to get to it, and or else pay the whatever it is, $5 a month to get rid of the advertisements. But the point was always about get me data and then put the data in context. And to put the data in context, it goes on this journey of I had a really talented engineer at GM, and he coined this data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And his point was simply, we get to wisdom by applying knowledge. And we apply knowledge by getting together those human connections we talked about at the beginning and distilling out of all the data, the real information. What's really going on? What do people really believe? What do people really want? What do people really need? Those kind of things. So we're surrounded by it. And because it's everywhere now, you should count. This is hard to do, by the way. I can't even figure it out anymore. How many digital computers are in your life?
Oh my gosh. I was thinking about this the other day. I don't even know because obviously with your background, you would include my car.
That's correct. And I would include all the computers your car is connected to, which you don't want to know the answer to that, but it's connected to a lot, especially in a city, right? Especially in a city like Ann Arbor or Austin, where we are both from. There's traffic monitoring systems, and it's what those guys at Google said. It's all about the data. It's not some evil empire, but rather it's improving our lives to know what we could do for traffic management or if you will, proactive traffic management. Don't go that way today because there will be a block there in 30 minutes because there always is at lunchtime. Well, that's a nice piece of insight, right? So life gets better because of all these connections. And anyways, so digitalization is all about different ways of bringing value. Digital is about using computers to do everything, which we're doing anyways, in case you didn't know it.
So one example that I'm thinking about, because I've recently started working on my own YouTube channel, and I've never been one who I don't think I'm going to monetize mine. I'm not going to be famous on YouTube, but I do a lot of videos for clients. I do a lot of things to help promo my speaking business and the training and coaching that I do. So I decided to hire somebody to help me clean up what was just a dumping ground for videos I've made over the years. And what's fascinating is we were talking about data to information to knowledge to wisdom. I've started noticing, and I've never paid attention before, all of the things that YouTube suggests to me. So if I look up a video on Taoism, because I'm studying Taoism, all of a sudden the next day when I log on, it starts giving me a lot of things on Taoism. Now, because my channel is about business relationships and human engagement and your network and maximizing live conferences, I look up a lot of things on that. So interspersed, I get all of these different things. But then if I go look up something like how to grill a steak, and I just need it that one time because I'm doing something unique with the steak, I still get those things. So it's interesting because YouTube has gotten really good at going from data to information to knowledge, but I don't know that there's always wisdom in that. Is that something that all of this digitization still has to strive for to really get it all right?
Well, this is going to go much longer than a half hour. But let me give you the short answer. Wisdom is a human thing. And I think this is at least my view, and there's other people that love talking about this that are much smarter than I am. But this last step, even the knowledge step, right? What's worthy knowledge? AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, it has trouble figuring that out. It's really good at pattern matching, and it's really good at finding patterns. Not so good at judging, is the pattern meaningful? Is it useful? Is it something I might want to keep around? Now, how does it deal with that? Well, it just keeps sampling more data. And then when the data starts to say, well, it's over there, that's where the answer is. And then it, starts to say that's maybe knowledgeable. So, this is kind of relevant to our times and every influence that goes on with these devices, right? There is this whole influencer network. I mean, even you and I, in our own way, we're influencing the Digital Enterprise Society, right? But the power of pattern matching and the speed of the computers, it can be used to influence in ways that are not so good for society. And I think this is where wisdom and maybe even parts of knowledge come in. Now, remember our history. There's a guy named Galileo who put a telescope together and looked at a planet called Jupiter and saw bodies moving around it and said, that guy named Copernicus was right. The Earth is not at the center of the solar system. And here's more evidence, because there's a planet that looks like a little solar system. My point in bringing that up is, well, was that bad? He certainly was chastised in his lifetime, forced to revoke all those claims. And it took another 100 years before a guy named Kepler came along and said, yeah, no, they were really right. And so the history lesson is sometimes knowledge is discovered and nobody wants to hear it, right? And so it takes more scientific discovery, more observations to really bring it forth. This point about wisdom, it takes scientific practice. Scientific practice is always forming hypotheses and looking for evidence and support, or evidence that refutes it, right? During our pandemic here, we've done miraculous things in how fast we've brought about different kinds of vaccines. It's really quite a miracle, right? That was only possible with lots of heavy-duty machine learning and some really smart people applying wisdom, right? They were even exploring, you and I talked a few weeks ago about exploring the unknowns, right? They used simulation and modeling, digital technologies to go off and explore ideas that might work as a vaccine. Well, and then they graded them, and then they chose them. That grading process was still humans. And that's why I think this wisdom side, a lot of people, Isaac Asimov, if you're a fan of science fiction, there's this last step on machine artificial intelligence that it's not pattern matching. It's inferences. It's understanding. This leap of faith that we make. These guys I mentioned, from Galileo to the others, they had a leap of faith. They had some insight. We don't quite understand where that insight comes from, but with that insight, he was able to discover something else. And those discoveries aren't in piles of data that we haven't looked at, right? They're something else. And so I think wisdom might still be in that category.
Well, I'm glad to know that the humans are still needed. I remember being a kid and watching Battlestar Galactica, where the computers, the AI got so good, they decided that humans were fallible and they were trying to kill them all. So I'm glad we still need the humans for the wisdom.
And by the way, that's one of those themes. If you go back far enough, it wasn't even Isaac Asimov, it was before him, but that's a common science fiction theme. The computers decide we're not good enough, and they take over. Well, if that happens, I am going to unplug. You and I will not do this way. We will only do it face to face.
So, Craig, what are the roadblocks and the pitfalls then to this whole digitalization journey?
Well, I think one of them is, the people that go to business school, get their their degrees in financial management, they're always doing the return on investment, which is fine, by the way. That's a solid way to stay in business, right? And some of these leaps of faith, some of these discoveries in how to use machine learning, they were pretty costly not that long ago because the machine power just was still expensive. Well, one of the things that's happened is this particular roadblock, the cost of the machinery to do all the pattern matching, has not only gone away, it's gone to the other extreme, which is it's so affordable, everybody's applying it. So we were spending years, months debating return on investment for these things. And now all of a sudden it's more of a threat. Oh my goodness, if we don't have a machine learning team, an AI team, we're going to be left behind, right? So the pitfall, I would tell you, is an awareness of how computers, the cost of owning computers, the cost of operating them has come down so dramatically that we don't even understand how to take advantage of it. I would encourage people, especially in our organization, the Digital Enterprise Society, to ask this question and help leaders understand, applying more simulation, applying more, exploring the unknowns, as we've talked about, that actually can get past that pitfall pretty quickly. Where do you stop? Well, what I would tell the financial guys, don't stop. Yeah, there'll be other things we'll discover along the way that'll be useful, right? The current pandemic has exposed what was there long before the pandemic, which is this over-optimized supply chain around the world. And it is not resilient to disruptions of the labor force, of raw material, of missing foundries, the key element being some chips, and now all of a sudden we don't have enough people making chips. How did that happen, right? And we don't need to go down to that discussion today, but it happened because we over-optimized the things we could measure. So I'll leave you with one last pitfall. We might not be measuring the right stuff. And this is where leadership and human inspiration and intelligence comes in is, well, then let's fix the measures. Well, that's right, sure. And that's easy to say. It's not so easy to do. What's the best way to do that? Well, I like the scientific process. You form a hypothesis and you test it. And then when you see some evidence that it's maybe right, you test it in a broader sample. Testing is easier and easier. It's no longer years, it's weeks. And, we're close. We just had an election, national election for local people, and it'll be interesting what they talk about in the next week. But part of what they're going to talk about is being in tune with what matters to people politically or value. As we come out of the pandemic, what services will they want? These pitfalls. It costs too much money. Seriously, just give it a chance. Now, good news. There is so much investment money out there, venture capital and otherwise. It's just amazing. Our friends at Rivian, so the people that do electric trucks, I don't know if you follow all that, but they're going to do an IPO in the upcoming week. And at least Wall Street thinks, Wall Street in quotes, not the journal, Wall Street thinks they'll be valued at $60 billion. Wow, that's kind of cool. What are the current car companies valued at? About the same amount. It's ridiculous. So what does that mean? In my mind, it just means there's so much money flowing around with the super rich people and people with their retirement accounts that want to take a little bit of risk. So with that kind of money behind you, there are going to be discoveries. And so if you're working for an organization that says, oh, we can't afford to do that, I don't know. I might just say you can't afford not to do it because somebody else is going to do it. So anyways, pitfalls are there if you measure the wrong thing. Fix the measures as soon as you can.
So as we wrap this up, this whole idea of digital versus digitalization. So is the name of our society wrong? Should we be the Digitalization Society?
I didn't appreciate this distinction until just the past couple months. And I work with some people that they talk a lot about it, like it's ready for everybody. But what one gentleman pointed out was not yet, right? It depends on your company. One of the reasons we formed the Digital Enterprise Society was to help medium and small size manufacturers who maybe hadn't embraced all these tools that myself and and John Jarrett and all the rest that we put into our big companies, whether they were aerospace companies or automotive companies, right? And so in this regard, teaching and talking about digital technologies is still important. But when they get past that basic stuff of, oh yeah, I'm using CAD and I'm using PDM and I'm using PLM, what's next? Well, what's next is, what is it you know really well? What's your wisdom? And how can you use digitalization to turn the process on its head and become more profitable in your line of business, whatever your line of business is? It's that ability to look at the processes, apply wisdom to change them, and use computers along the way. That's how you know you're doing digitalization as opposed to just digitizing. If you haven't changed your process as you went to using digital tools, you're not doing digitalization. So I think, and I challenge the trustees to go think about this. Should there be a part of the Digital Enterprise Society as digitalization? Well, absolutely. If they're already using tools, this is no longer a tools discussion, it's a process discussion. If they haven't yet got all the tools, well, then maybe it's process and tools together. But at some point, if the processes don't want to change, then the people aren't serious about digitalization. Think about that original example of recorded music, right? There is no way that process for delivering it on the cloud through your iPhone is anything like the process of manufacturing a piece of vinyl and getting you a needle that sits with a magnet on a floor. People have to go to a museum to go look at what I'm talking about, right?
And having to drive to the record store to get it. Yeah, it's a whole different process.
And you got to pay some audio company a lot of money for a super sensitive needle with just the right electromagnetics, and electromagnetics. Why do I care about that in digital? Well, you don't. That's the truth, right? Other than some interference, but anyways, I think the society should decide. I think there are companies in the Digital Enterprise Society that are into digitalization. They absolutely are, and I think even as where I retired from, the car companies, they look at the Silicon Valley companies, and they're like, wow, how did you get to that valuation? You don't really have manufacturing footprint. Yeah, but the money's flowing. So, I think digitalization is part of the way you tap into that spigot of money, right? That you're not afraid to change your business and change it fundamentally for different value propositions to customers, paying customers. So, anyways, thanks, Thom. That's an interesting question.
I think this was a great conversation, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Do us a favor, come back every single week, because Craig and I try to bring to this podcast interesting conversations and interviews and ideas that are going to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. So make sure that you join us next week, because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. And remember, the Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.